Oh,
All right. Thanks, Elaine, again for coming today. Please introduce yourself, your name, where you were born, when you immigrated to Canada, and how old you are now.
sure. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to meet you. My name is Jelaine Santiago. My pronouns are she and her. I am the co-founder and CEO of Cambio & Co. and Cinta & Co., which are two Filipino jewelry businesses based here in Toronto. I was born in a small city called Malolos, Bulacan in the Philippines, and we immigrated to Canada when I was 3 years old in March 1993.
And how old are you now?
Oh, how old I am now? I am 33. So
Right.
30 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And you were 3 years old, so pretty young when you first came here. But do
Yes.
you remember at all your first few months in Canada? Anything at all you remember?
I have very vague recollections of what it was like. Of course, it's all very blurred, but I remember like we were living with my auntie at the time who had sponsored us to come. So my mother's aunt essentially. And so I remember just like being in their home and just like it being very unfamiliar and just it was also colder. Um, so I do have vague recollections of that, but most of my memories now of are things that I understand from my parents' perspectives and hearing what it was like for them when we first arrived. And I remember like my dad, you know, because we couldn't afford to have a car, so my dad had his bike and he would bike around everywhere. And he had been biking around applying for jobs, and then eventually got hired as in a factory where he basically stayed there for the next like 40 years essentially, or not 40, 30 years essentially. And then I also remember like, yeah, once we finally did have a car, just hearing the stories of, you know, it was the cheapest car they could afford and how it would like break down all the time. And my mom tells us a story about how it broke down in the middle of the road. And basically my sisters who are older than me, about 5 and 6 years older, how they had to like help push the car up. And she was trying to get to work, or things like little stories like that I really understand. Like it wasn't that easy. It wasn't an easy time and it was really challenging. But for myself being that young, I think I had pretty fond memories of growing up. And I remember the first time like we all played in the snow together, and we still have really nice photos of it. So I still remember that feeling of being in the snow for the first time and how that felt.
Right. So how was it growing up in Canada for you?
Growing up in Canada, it's a complex question because in many ways, I think being really young, for me, my experience is of course different compared to someone who immigrated much later when they're older. For example, with my sisters who were already older. But for me, growing up has been um, an overall really positive experience. I think that I'm really proud. You know, I'm really proud and really grateful that my parents immigrated here. I'm really grateful for the life that I have today. And I know that I have opportunities here that I wouldn't have if my parents, you know, if we stayed in Philippines, then my life would be very different. But at the same time, you know, being here in the diaspora, being an immigrant, being the child of immigrants as well, you grow up facing challenges like racism and discrimination and a lot of those kind of situations that are really complex, but that form a part of your identity. So yeah, I think it's always a complex kind of question, but I think that overall I'm really grateful, while also recognizing that there's a lot of things that can be improved, I guess, in terms of supporting immigrants and people of color.
Thank you for such an insightful answer. I just wanted to follow up on those experiences of racism or discrimination. Did you ever experience any of those growing up?
Yeah, yes, definitely. I think it's also very subtle. I think, well, there were cases of both subtle but also not very subtle situations. So when we first moved in to Toronto, we were growing up, we were staying with my aunt, and then we eventually moved to Scarborough. So Scarborough, you know, I was one of many immigrant kids, and I just remember being able to fit in really well with everyone because we all came from different backgrounds. And then we moved to Markham later on when I was in grade 7. And in Markham, it was really not the Markham it is today. I was one of the few non-white kids, and I felt very much like confused about what that experience was like. Suddenly going from a place where there are a lot of like, people that look like me to now going into this other neighborhood or this other kind of environment where now I felt very much like one of the Asian kids in the class, and that shift in identity was very challenging. So in that case, like, you experience a lot of things that are just very like subtle. So it can go from very subtle of like the kids in my class who would talk about going to the cottages and like asking about our cottage. And I was like, what's a cottage? Not even knowing what that was and just being, very unsure, and also feeling like I needed to prove my worth based on how close I could be to like whiteness, to trying to be like one of those like cool kids who are often like the white kids in school who were not, who were like born in Canada and like the typical Canadian. So there are those subtle kind of things. And then there are the microaggressions, like people making fun of the food that I had, just kind of judging and saying, oh, this is smelly, or me feeling really embarrassed and like hiding my food, and just kind of pretending that I wasn't hungry. I remember doing that a lot growing up. And then to the more direct kinds of discrimination or racism that still happen today, but just recently, or not recently, but in high school, I remember my parents, they hired a contractor for their home, and like this contractor was there to like fix the basement or something like that, and for whatever reason he just assumed that my parents couldn't speak proper English, even though they had been communicating with him this whole time and they're the ones that hired him. But I remember being home and he kept directing all of his questions to me, even though I was just a high school student, and him refusing to acknowledge my parents. So there are things like there are things like that just like happened growing up that I just remember at the time being like, I don't understand, like this was weird. And now that I'm older and I understand a little bit more about what racism looks like in different ways, I understand now, like that was just him, having his own racial biases, and just not realizing he was being racist.
Right, right. You were very young when all of this was happening. How did you deal with that? I mean, you mentioned being confused, but did you have a chance to talk to anybody, to get any help from any organization or from among your peers? How did you deal with it?
Yeah, when I was really young, I honestly didn't really have anyone to speak to. I spoke to my friends, and I did have a few like close Asian friends who I could speak with, but who also were different. So I think that's a challenge that we have as immigrants, like as immigrant youth, essentially, is that oftentimes, especially if you're like looking at other Asians or Asian communities, for example, you kind of assume that we all have the same experience. But for example, one of my close friends is Chinese and I'm Filipina. And so I didn't even realize the differences either between our cultures. And so sometimes they would also say things to me that felt very like kind of offensive. And I didn't really understand why it was offensive. But I did have like at least those friends that we could talk about some of those things. But to be honest, most of it was just like me kind of internalizing a lot of those things on my own. I didn't really have a lot of people that I was that I could talk to, and I didn't even know what I needed to talk to. I think that was the challenge that I realize now. I feel bad for my younger self in that way, that she didn't even know what the problems were. It was really hard to vocalize it. And luckily for me, in my mid-20s now, I finally, have had the opportunity to meet a lot of different people who are really just more aware and just really proud of their cultures and heritages. And so I've had a lot of really amazing support from my peers, which I would really like. Yeah, I think if you have in whatever stage your life is at right now, as you're watching this, and like I hope you do have people in your social circle that you can trust, and that you feel that you can speak to. But there's also like, now I realize I could have gone to like therapy, and that there are programs at school, and like there are also social workers at schools that I also did not even know. I don't think it was really available at the time when I was in school. So I think there are more supports now. But I think also there is like a lot of communities online as well that you can connect with. So
And organizations like Kababayan. This is
yes,
a very,
exactly.
very
Yes,
big
of course.
impact.
Sorry.
Jane, sorry, Jelaine. Right. So let's talk about your profession. What do you do now as a profession, and how did you get there?
Sure. Yes. So I mentioned earlier, but I am CEO and co-founder of my own business. I actually run two businesses that are e-commerce companies. So we sell online, but they're both focused on Filipino jewelry. So the first company is Cambio and Co. That is focused on celebrating Filipino craftsmanship. We make earrings like this and necklaces and jewelry that's all made actually by artisans in the Philippines. And so really what I get to do, which is really amazing, is that I actually get to work with people in the Philippines from my home country, and reconnect with my culture in that way. And so that's Cambio and Co. And then we also have Cinta and Co., which is focused on weddings. So I get to work with couples and people planning their weddings who really want to celebrate their culture on their wedding day. And it's been a really wonderful journey. I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. I just didn't think that was an option that was available to me. But I've been doing this for the last 8 years. And in terms of how I got here, it's quite a long winding journey. So if any of you are sitting there just not sure what you want to do with your life, then I'm here to tell you it's gonna be okay, because my career path has been very winding. But I guess to summarize it, I actually went to university thinking I could I could be a veterinarian. I studied animal sciences and like animal biology specialty at the University of Guelph, graduated with a major in biological sciences and a minor in political science, because I was always really interested in like social justice and just learning about international development and those sort of things. So I kind of combined them. I graduated from university to study that to be a veterinarian, but then I ended up changing career paths and went back to school to George Brown College to study human resources. So I actually ended up working for 2 years in a financial tech company in Toronto, once I finished my college program. And then while I was working in that field, I just realized like, this isn't the field for me. I'm not very, I think corporate was just not something that made me feel very like good or very happy in terms of that environment. And so I did a lot of soul searching and took on a bunch of freelance projects, just started taking on some different marketing clients, but just taking on odd jobs for a little while until I realized, until essentially we built the business to what it is today. And so now we're 8 years later, we have a team of full-time people of 4, and we have some part-time employees in Toronto as well. So we have a team in Manila, in Philippines, and in Toronto. So it's been quite a journey.
Amazing, amazing journey, Jelaine. I'm impressed. What do you like most about it?
Yeah, about my role or about my work, I love everything. And I don't love it all the time, but in general, I love everything that I do. And so I think the most important thing for me is like, I love that I'm able to reconnect with my culture and with being Filipino. I was able to learn so much about Philippines and about my parents, about how my parents grew up and learning about our cultural difference, like the cultural differences, able to understand a little bit more about my family's history. And yeah, just like I really love that that's what I get to do in my work. And like I was able to turn my heritage and my search for that feeling of connection into a form of livelihood for myself, which in turn creates livelihood for other Filipinos, because we're really focused on Filipino artisans and also creating employment in our communities. So I think that's something that's really amazing. And even better is like our work, we get to actually talk, like our customers are also people who are in the diaspora who are trying to reconnect with their heritage as well. And so oftentimes people will like share their stories with me about how our jewelry reminds them of their like grandmother, or like their mother who passed away, or who is still living overseas. So that is really meaningful to me that I get to do that.
Right. Do you remember your happiest day at work? Could you tell us about it?
Yes. My happiest day at work was actually when I got to go back to Philippines. We go back every year, well, not including the pandemic, but we go back every year for the business to meet our artisan partners. And so my most favorite day at work was like when I got to meet the artisans, one of the artisans that we work with and visit their workshop in Manila. And I just got to talk to the different artisans and just hear their stories. And I think it just really was like the best day because I would never have imagined that this would be my career or that this would be something I would be able to do is like actually to travel back to Philippines and to feel like I belong there. I think so many of us who are immigrants, even though I immigrated here so young, I can only imagine how it is to be someone who immigrated much later in life. But we're often kind of caught in this feeling of being in between spaces and not feeling like you belong in either country or in either culture. And so I just remember that day, just feeling like I really belonged in Philippines, in my culture with my people. But at the same time, still being like me and having my experience, having grown up in Canada. So it really felt like I just felt so good about me and who I was becoming.
Amazing, amazing. So yours has been, as you said, a long-winded journey road, towards where you are now. But thinking about your journey, what has been the greatest challenge that you experienced in trying to get where you are right now, and how did you overcome it?
Hmm. Yeah, the greatest challenge was really just like trusting myself. When we actually first started our business for Cameo Co, our vision was always to focus on Filipino products, all made in Philippines, Filipino customers. That was really our focus, like our dream from the beginning. But early on, people kind of told us that that was a bad idea. It's like, you're never going to be a real business. You're never going to be able to make any money if you are focused on like only your community. Right. And so I really, I believed them because who am I? I've never been an entrepreneur. I didn't really know anyone in my family who has grown a business. So I listened to those people and I kind of like, we went down this different path, selling not only products from Philippines, but products from all of these other countries too, because I didn't think it was enough to just be Filipino. And I actually did that. We did that for like the first 4 years of our business. And it was a really, really challenging time because I just felt like I really watered my vision down. I didn't listen to myself. I listened to everyone else but myself. And in the end, we weren't making any money. So it was really like a financial struggle. I was like working reception and minimum wage jobs for a while in order to pay the bills. And I just remember feeling really, just really discouraged and just so, just sad during that time. And now I realize like, things only changed and we only began to grow once I stopped listening to other people's advice and I started to listen to myself and trusting my own vision. And we told ourselves like, even if our business fails, then at least we're doing it the way that we believe it. And if it fails, then we'll learn something, but it's time to trust ourselves. And so I'm really grateful that we made that decision and things got a lot better.
Congratulations, and thank you for sharing that. Share with us too your thoughts on fulfillment and success. What is success? How do you measure fulfillment and success?
Yeah, success for me, well, it's such a personal question, but success for me is doing something that you love. Something that you love, something that you feel really good at, and something that helps other people. So I think if you're able to find something that's in that middle, something you love, something you're good at, something that helps other people, the money comes automatically, like it will come naturally to you because you're doing something you're really good at and something that people need or people want and that actually helps them, then the money will flow. And I think that's what success really is to me, is finding that perfect balance of all of those different things. And it might change from different seasons of your life. You might be passionate about one thing in one time of your life and then it'll change later on. But as long as you're always staying true to yourself and always being curious, that's, you'll always be successful.
That's beautiful. So we've heard about your journey, your passion, your commitment, to succeed in this area. Do you have any other advice to young people wanting to pursue this path or profession, maybe not an exact path, but this profession.
Yeah, yeah, hopefully not exactly my wedding path. But if you're interested in, potentially starting your own business or just doing something entrepreneurial, I think my main suggestion or my main advice is just get started. Like, you're never too young to start. It's never too early to start, and you don't need to know anything. You don't need to have the perfect idea or have a particularly unique idea, and you don't need to wait until you feel like you know exactly what you're doing, because to be honest, that day will never come where you completely feel like you know what you're doing, or you feel like you're ready. And the best time to get started, if you're really passionate about, you feel that entrepreneurial drive inside you, you just feel like there's something inside you that needs to be expressed, then I think today is the perfect day to start doing that, even in the small ways, or the big ways. So I think that's really what it is don't wait for someone to give you permission, or don't wait for like a degree. School is important, but at the same time, there's a lot of education outside and within school. So
Thank you, Gillian. Let me just